$886 billion. That's how much the House and the Senate just agreed the United States should spend on our national security in 2024. That's about $28 billion more than we spent last year. The House and the Senate, on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis, just passed the Annual Defense Authorization Bill, also known as the NDAA. And no, it did not include any of the restrictions on woke policies that the far-right Republicans were demanding. The final vote in both chambers was 87-13 in the Senate, and in the House, it was 310-118. So what does the NDAA do? Well, it simply outlines the policy agenda for the Department of Defense and the U.S. military, and it authorizes the spending levels for Pentagon priorities. It does not actually include the money, but in this case, the $886 billion will most likely be approved when Congress goes through the budget process. Now, just because the NDAA doesn't authorize the money specifically, doesn't mean this bill isn't critical to our national security. It is. Now, I won't tell you about everything that's included in the bill in this video because it's actually a 3,100-page bill, so there's a lot in there. But here are a few things that it does. It adds a 5.2% pay raise for service members and civilian employees at the Pentagon. The NDAA authorizes the purchase of new weapons and missile defense systems, including developing hypersonic weapons and upgrades to the nuclear arsenal. It expands the military partnerships in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe. It continues the efforts of the United States to counter China and Russia. It sets up a submarine deal with Britain and Australia that's been in the works for a while. It sets up a review board to consider reinstating service members who were discharged for refusing to obey the order to get a COVID-19 vaccine. And it also extends the FISA program through April. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act program allows the government to conduct wiretaps on foreign targets outside the United States. But many people worry that the government has actually been misusing that power for years. Lastly, the NDAA extends the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative through 2027, which is the vehicle that allows the president to continue to support Ukraine's war efforts against Russia. But the bulk of the money that would go into that initiative so the president can dole it out a little at a time was not approved. That's because the funding for Ukraine, as you know, has been tied to a bitter fight between Democrats and Republicans over the U.S. border. And it's unclear if that fight is going to be resolved or this money for Ukraine will be approved anytime this year. It's also worth noting the far-right Republicans, mostly in the House, had been demanding for months that the NDAA include restrictions on what they called woke policies, including restricting abortion access for military members and banning transgender care for all active and retired military members, and eliminating racial diversity and inclusion policies at the Pentagon. So they lost that fight in both the House and the Senate. None of those provisions were included in this bill. This $886 billion NDAA will now go to President Biden to be signed into law.